and let's get to Radio 2. As I said at the beginning of the live, I may dance around a little bit. So I think it's been quite shocking this week. And again, thank you for all your comments. Some of them are telling wonderful stories about what Steve Wright meant to you. And I haven't, because I've been out most of the day and yesterday for the birthday weekend, I haven't been able to get those comments together to use them on this live or put a video together. But what I am going to do over the next couple of days is just make these videos with some of these wonderful comments, very insightful comments. And it's been shocking to people because it was unexpected. And I think even though there was a possibility that Steve was going to get another show or shows or something else on the BBC, he was still doing this one show a week, and he was, somebody mentioned earlier that he was doing the narrating, the scripting and the narrating for Top of the Pops. But I would like to repeat, I haven't come up with this, but I just want to repeat a quote which I think beautifully encapsulates this whole week, because it's quite shocking. It's like a friend's gone. Someone said he's off air and left the studio unexpectedly, which I think is beautiful. I don't know whether it's because it has resonance with me, having worked in radio for 40 years, but there's a lot of hand-wringing going on at the BBC. Where is the humour in it all? Because Steve Wright was a humorist. That was his connection. That was his emotional currency, if you wish. Where's the humour? I mean, he was a humble guy, very humble guy, but just knew his radio instinctually. This is not something that you can learn. It's not something that you can get in a book or a course somewhere. Loads of people run courses on radio. I mean, I could offer my take on some of it, and I've said many times since the beginning of this channel, if anybody wants a helping hand with a bit of knowledge or a bit of technique or tools, then I'm more than happy to help you. Dan Payne's asking how Steve Wright died. It was unexpected, and it's been referred to the coroner. It's not being released, as Rich says. Interestingly, all this week I've tried to do some research on his wife, Cindy. Couldn't find her. Couldn't find anything. Spent hours and hours and hours doing research. And he was married to her for quite a while. Met her at, 210 in Reading, where he and Mike Reed started. And couldn't find anything. And then I found out today, because it's only just been released today, that Steve Wright's wife, Cindy, died in July 2020. A coroner ruled the death non-suspicious, but said there was not enough evidence to establish the cause. And if you can read between the lines, you know what that's saying. I'll say it again. Wife Cindy, Steve Wright's wife Cindy, died in July 2020. A coroner ruled death non-suspicious, but said there was not enough evidence to establish the cause. Now, I'm going to do a bit more research around Steve, and I'm going to do another video in the morning. My first video in the morning is going to be about something that I discovered earlier, and I don't just want to offer it on the live when I'm tired. I want to make sure that I am respectful, and I want to make sure that it's accurate, and I want to make sure that the source that I have is impeccable. Somebody's just said P.T. Ham, broken heart. Possibly, but I do believe that Steve loved his wife Cindy beyond measure, and she passed in 2020. I understand whether this is true or not, or whether this is the BBC covering its backside, that they were going to offer Steve a new show. And I think these new radio stations, Radio 1, Radio 2, Radio 3, or however many they're going to make, was going to be his new home. As Rich says, broken heart isn't a medical condition. So it has to go to, someone asked the question, it has to go to the coroner, for the coroner to determine the mode of death to make sure that there's no foul play included. I'm sure there wasn't. And I'm sure that they will come to a determination, a bit like his wife Cindy. Non-suspicious, but said there was not enough evidence to establish the cause. So possibly an open verdict. Now, let's kind of rewind a little bit. I'll keep going for another 10 minutes or so. And somebody, I think it was Jeremy Vine, said the other day that, oh, it was Steve that changed the face of Radio 2. There is an element of that, I agree. But for me, the man that changed the face of Radio 2, because it was all a bit cuddly, it was all a bit anties in pearl necklaces. Not those pearl necklaces, yeah, wrongin'. Twin setting pearls. And it was Johnny Walker. Johnny Walker, he was rock and roll, baby. He was a former pirate. He was rock and roll. And remember the Coke and Whoas? Can you remember that? Johnny Walker, his story, that one event changed the face of Radio 2 because he stayed for a little while after that. So yes, Steve Wright coming across because he left Radio 1 and then went into the wilderness into commercial radio for a while. And it did, and it didn't work out. It wasn't hitting as hard as he could. And then he got the offer from Radio 2 and went. But that was after Johnny Walker's Coke and Halls story. Now, I was looking at, as I say, all week, I was trying to find, and I was trying to do my research, and there was nowhere was there a mention of Cindy, his wife, Cindy Robinson. And I believe that's what broke his heart. I'm sure he was very well aware of Cindy's passing in July 2020, which is not that long ago. It's kind of right at the beginning of the lockdowns and jibber jabber. Now, Steve's public persona was very different to the private, humble man, as is the way with a lot of radio stations. Look, how many people do you know that would love to go into a room and talk to themselves for 3 hours and then leave and get paid for it? It's almost the path of madness. But that's what Alan and I agree. Kenny Everett's jingles were fabulous. Kenny Big Hands, Brotherly Love, Jip Atkinson. Oh, what a wonderful memory. I'm not going to sing. Don't worry, I'm not going to sing. So Steve Wright was talking to himself and on some to some of his guests. But do you know something? Most radio presenters or DJs, broadcasters, however you want to term them, can't play the music that they love. They can't, because the computers are choosing it now. Computers are telling you that's what you play next. And do you know a lot of radio stations, some of the systems, it's literally a big green button that says next, poof, next, poof, next. There you go, next again, next again. Some radio stations, GWR back in the day, you literally couldn't say anything that you wanted to say. You were told what to say and how to say it. But I've said to you before, broadcasters, that's not what we do. We engage with the listener, and that's what Steve Wright did. But Steve Wright did radio that he loved. Steve Wright produced, presented, and broadcast radio that he loved. He would love to have been at home listening to the Zoo format, because that's what he did when he went to America. He was listening to Rick D's, Kiss FM, LA. Noel Edmonds. I agree. Andy Turner. So, a couple of hours of an afternoon talking to himself. He would go in at 9 o'clock and go home at 5:30. That was his day, Monday to Friday. That's why they asked for your dedications for love songs for Tuesday or Wednesday, because they would produce it midweek and then he would pre-record it. It's never live. You need to let the guy have some time off. What happened? The Jacobite says, what happened to Noel? He's living in New Zealand. Saw a picture of him the other day, yesterday, I think. And I thought, is that Noel Edmonds? Has he had a facelift? Now, he might not have done, but I looked at him going, how old are you, Noel? He must be 80 now. He must be 70s. He's way older than Steve Wright was. But he lives in New Zealand. Would he come back? I very much doubt it. He's just seeing his day out. So Steve Wright on Radio 2, I've said before, go woke, go broke. People are voting with their feet. They've had enough. Your comments are brutal. They're straight talking, And I would hate to be a manager on Radio 2, because loads of them. Adrian, the fall in listeners is down to the number of factors, not just some poor presenting choices, though Simon Mayo leaving was a joy, as he's one of the worst broadcasters ever on radio. Blimey, Nick Manser. I have to disagree. As a broadcaster myself, technically, Simon Mayo is one of the best broadcasters in the country, because you can see it a mile away and hear it. I think Nick Manser was saying repetitious playlists and the lack of quality in a lot of the popular artists around now have also affected numbers. The role music plays in the cultural life of the country has lessened and people simply have other things to do. I agree wholeheartedly with you. All these have an effect on listening numbers too. Oh, and my favourite radio station in BBC, GMR. Great Manchester Radio, my local radio station. It is a good BBC. Have they still got Alan Bessick on the BBC, GMR? Julie Basford. Adrian, thanks for your amazing insight. Well, you're welcome, Julie. Thank you very much for your very kind words. Roaming Randomer. Hello, Adrian. I really enjoy your programmes on here. Victorian morbid curiosity of Alex Belfield's sensational world was what first brought me to your channel, and I've enjoyed the rest since. Whilst you were offering to pull back the curtain on how radio works, may I ask your thoughts on the following queries that have crossed my mind since the news of Steve Wright's passing? Okay? Thanks. So, the 5 p.m. news bulletin on Radio 2 broke the news, although it was midway through when Mike Powell received the breaking news, in quotation marks, and was very clearly emotional as he read it out. Heard it, listened, agreed.
Breaking news now. And the Radio 2 presenter Steve Wright has died at the age of 69.
And then he stumbled through the bulletin, making quite a balls up of the remaining stories, very understandably, obviously. Out of the news, the show's host sounded incredibly upset as she read a prepared script about Steve Wright.
It's really hard to know what to say about the news of Steve Wright's passing, except we are all absolutely devastated and shocked and blindsided by this news.
But just a second. She was presenting the usual programme in the first hour, but then during the 5 o'clock, she had 2 minutes to, one, deal with the massive shock of a sudden loss of a personal friend, and two, come up with a very heartfelt and well-worded reaction. And three, hold it together on air for 2 hours of extremely emotional reads from text and email. So Mike Powell reads the mid-bulletin, breaking news at 17:02, cut to BBC News TV channel, breaking the story at 17:09, and joined on the line at 17:10, apologies, from a very emotional Jeremy Vine, speaking on behalf of the Radio 2 family. Question is this, Adrian. Does it look like BBC Radio 2 staff knew all day that the 17:02 breaking news was coming? No. I think they may have had a sniff of it earlier in the day, but you have to remember that the audience now is complex and sophisticated, and there's not a lot of trust anywhere in the media now. So the BBC had to get it right. So I believe that it was quite shocking, and I think it was... Look, a national radio station isn't just the presenter. Sometimes, like 5 Live, there'll be the presenter, and then there'll be 2 or 3 people operating the buttons with producers through the glass and people working the phone. So there could be, I don't know, say 3 or 4 or 5 people through the glass with the presenter, and they'll be talking in the presenter's ear saying, look, big story coming, just read it out. And the only thing that the presenters and or the newscasters would have done is being able to read it first, and they would not have been able to contain their emotion because it would be in front of them and it would have been written by the producer or somebody through the glass. Because again, the BBC has to be seen to do the right thing. There's reputational risk here, and they will manage that risk by the way it is worded. But they can't legislate for the emotion coming from the presenter or the newscaster. They can't. And that was real and that was raw. So I would suggest to you that that's about as real as it gets. And these are professional people that do it day in, day out, hours at a time. Newscaster would have been doing it for, I don't know, 8 to 10 hours a day. Sarah Cox would have been on air 3 hours a day. So she's a very experienced broadcaster, but it's that rawness, that reality that you were hearing in her voice, I believe was genuine. The words will have been written by somebody else, but her emotion. That seems reasonable, Adrian, and an Oscar could go to Sarah Cox for her performance in the first hour. She didn't know. Genuinely, I don't think she did. But more importantly, was this a massive crisis management effort from a radio station which knew that it had broken Steve's heart for less listeners? Good point. It all seems incredibly contrived. I remember once working with somebody who died suddenly, and although I had only known him for a matter of weeks, I was in tremendous shock and sadness for several hours after hearing about it. My body felt cold. I just couldn't believe what I'd heard. Sadly, most people know that feeling of utter disbelief and denial, even for people they don't really know. It makes you a bit dumbstruck. Do you remember when Mark and Lard stormed out of the Radio 1 studio when their own news bulletin announced that their mate Kirsty McCall had died halfway through their show? I do. And quite rightly. Because again, they didn't know. And the pastoral care, whether it's national broadcasting or local radio, regional radio, network radio, the pastoral care just doesn't exist. It's news. Just get on with it. And I believe that Mark and Lard did exactly the right thing. I remember that vividly. Anyway, as Wright says, I'm getting the sense of BBC crisis management over genuine, spontaneous sadness. But if you managed to read this far, Adrian, I'd be interested to hear your point of view of how genuine it all seems in retrospect. For further listening, Radio 5 Drive produced an amazing show, attracting Nicky Campbell, Bob Harris, Paul Gambaccini, Mitch Benn, Mark Goodyear, Jeremy Vine, Tony Blackburn, Lewis MacLeod, and Mr. Angry. All within 2 hours of the news of their great mate's untimely and completely unexpected death. And I listened to it, yes. Johnny Walker, Coke and Halls brought rock and roll to Radio 2, but hiring Steve Wright was their masterstroke. Firing him was their stupidest mistake.